Hello, folks. Welcome back to English 102. As you can see here, this is a video meant for the following CRNs: 21940, 21971, and 21972. The content of this video lecture is the same for all three of those courses. Okay, so this Monday, January 24th, your Module 1 MLA style quiz was due. And then in a week or so, there is the next module, the Logical Fallacies quiz, due February 7th. And so this video lecture is basically sort of part 2 of Module 2. That is to say, if we go down to in the PDF version here of the syllabus, but you can, of course, find all of these modules in Canvas. So in Module 2, which forms the next quiz, the Logical Fallacies quiz, I've already, uploaded this file, which I used in the discussion of this video lecture, which I posted the link to and sent you all an individual Canvas inbox message with that link, but it's now also, like here, it's linked to in Module 2. For this particular video lecture, which as you can see here, is coming soon because I'm now in the process of creating it, I will primarily use this file here called Basic Logic and Logical Fallacies. And so with the background information in this file and this video lecture on rhetoric and this file on logical fallacies and this video lecture, this one right here, you will be able to then take your quiz number 2 or module 2. All right, so I will come back to this handout in a moment. It's a file, again, right here. If you just, excuse me, click this link right here, this, either in the syllabus or in the module itself, it'll take you to this PDF file. And this is what I'll be using during today's discussion mostly. Before I do that, though, before I dive into this logic and logical fallacies file, I do want to kind of give a little bit of context to what we're doing here. So you may recall that, excuse me. You may recall that last video lecture we had discussion about what is rhetoric, and I mentioned that if you were an undergraduate getting a Bachelor of Arts, you would have studied 3 course areas: grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which we talked about last time. But this time we're going to kind of have a kind of crash course in logic. And you may have also remember that later in that PowerPoint and in the video lecture, I mentioned that logos is the first and probably the most important building block of rhetoric. And this fact where we get the word logic from, logos, the Greek for word. And down at the bottom of this slide, you see here at the bottom rectangle in red, an example of a logical argument that is not using numbers like up here, 86%, but instead is using only words. And this is pretty much how the logic and logical fallacies operate, are, all idea, concept, word driven. And come back to this later because, when we start talking about the what we call the major premise, minor premise, and conclusion of deductive logic. This example right here is basically in that format. So you all may also remember that in Raphael's painting here, the School of Athens, which contains a lot of important figures from the Greek world, including in order, Socrates here, who's of course dead at this time, theoretically, because I'll describe how he commits suicide in reaction, opposition, resistance to Athens, who told him to basically leave and stop preaching his ideas of truth. And then in the middle here, sort of front and center, is the older Socrates, the older Plato. So Socrates comes first. He teaches Plato. Plato teaches Aristotle, who in effect develops the system of logic of deduction that we still use today. And then later, Aristotle will teach Alexander the Great over here. And there are other figures too. There's Pythagoras writing down his theorem. There's Diogenes the Cynic, Euclid and his geometry, Zoroaster, Ptolemy, and so on. So I mention this because, again, as I mentioned in the last video lecture, you are participating in this course, English Composition 2, Freshman Composition 2, this sort of long tradition of Western culture, Western civilizations, indebtedness to logic and reason. If you've ever heard, that common phrase we use here in the United States, we're a country that is ordered or founded on the rule of law. The rule of law is fundamentally predicated on logic. But if you break down the different areas of philosophy, as I mentioned last time, right, you'll see that logic is certainly one of the categories. Another way of looking at it is this way, the branches of philosophy. There's logic over here, right? And again, all of these images are in your logic folder in the Google Class Drive. Logic itself is really a kind of, rational system of thought. It's, if you think of mathematics, which you can see here, this symbolic logic is beginning to approach. It's all based on, abstract concepts, but in a very kind of rigid, rule-bound system. So we will look at these Venn diagrams in a moment when we get to the deductive logic part. But we will not get as abstract as this, which is pure symbolic logic. But in effect, that's if you take in, say, calculus or, nonlinear dynamics and, heavy-duty mathematical operations. They're abstract concepts and terms and polynomials and whatnot that have a system of rules to them. And we will come back to this structure, the major premise, minor premise, therefore conclusion. I'll mention this in a moment, that these three dots in a triangle, if you want to take quick shorthand in your notes in college, this symbol means therefore. If you turn it upside down where there's a dot at the bottom, it would mean because. But this is the basic structure of deductive logic. Okay, so that's some background information and context. So here's that file. I would like to believe that you all would at some point, if you had the opportunity as an undergraduate, to take a course called Logic or Introduction to Logic. I highly recommend it if you have the ability. We don't typically offer that often at Grambling, but it can help you in so many different disciplines. Here we are in an English course, and I'm, conveying logic and rules of argumentation to you. But whether it's criminal justice or political science or all of course, the sciences, which are predicated or based upon, the scientific method, which itself is a system of logical steps and processes. It's the way the human mind works. So taking that kind of class can really help you. But if you're not, what I'm going to do is kind of break down, what a basic argument is here for you, and then build up to what would be inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, and then talk about the logical fallacies. So if you've never seen this academic abbreviation, you've probably read it in some textbooks, right? It means in Latin exemplificatia, which we translate as, for example. And when you're reading it, in your mind, if you will, or certainly if you're reading it in a text out loud, never actually say e.g., but instead use the automatic English translation, for example. The same is true of I.E. period, that is the IE, which stands for id s, meaning that is. Do not say IE out loud, instead say that is. So an argument contains reasons offered in support of a conclusion, okay? And the conclusion can either be stated or implied. So pretty simple argument here. The cause or the reason, because it is too cold, comma, and this is what sets up a dependent clause, therefore you need a comma. The conclusion is we should not go skiing today. Pretty simple. You could have the sentence switched in reverse, begin with a capital W. We should not go skiing today because it is too cold, period. And in that case, you would not need a comma before because. But you can have more than one reason, obviously, right? You can build up reasons. And here's an example where the conclusion is civil disobedience. Think of, protests in the streets or protests during civil rights movement or Ferguson or BLM or, whatever civil disobedient you want to point to. It can sometimes be justified or is sometimes justified based on these two reasons. A, or one, because some laws are unjust, which certainly is true. Think of how many laws we've repealed or changed over time. And B, because society or you or us cannot expect to change unjust laws until it is made aware of the problem, which of course is true. That's basic kind of logic. Because of those two reasons, A and B, therefore civil disobedience is sometimes justified. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want the law enforcement and what Louis Althusser, the Marxist critic, calls ideological and repressive state apparatuses to automatically buy into that and say, yes, of course, civil disobedience is sometimes justified. In fact, it's their role, like law enforcement in the military and court system and so on, to keep a check on civil disobedience, but sometimes it is justified. We certainly can argue that back and forth. And these two examples, right, they're opposite sides of the coin, so to speak, on the issue of abortion. Some might give the following reason, all life, including the yet unborn, is sacred. So that's their starting point. Therefore, abortion is illegal. And then someone might counter with a woman's body belongs to her alone. Therefore, abortion should remain legal, which we're currently about to maybe have overturned in this country after 50 years. All right, so a basic argument, as you can see from this image, because it is an image, is linear in nature. You can see this big black arrow, right, going from point A to point B. You need to start with a fact or multiple facts, and then based on those facts, draw a conclusion, okay? But there are a bunch of little quirks or twists and turns along the way. So this says fact, Rick has fair skin. Obviously, you know, that's empirical evidence we can see. Rick has red hair and freckles, and he sunbathed all day yesterday. And based on those facts, you could make the following qualified conclusion. You could say Rick will probably get seriously sunburned. So notice that the qualifier is probably. If that word did not exist, if it said Rick will get seriously sunburned, you will have committed, as I will show you in the logical fallacies, an overstatement. And overstatement is one of the most common logical fallacies of, you know, saying that something will happen. Slippery slope is a version of this too, like you can predict the future. So you have to qualify your arguments responsibly. And we will talk more about qualifiers in a moment. But along the way, this argument can be broken down into a couple of other components, what is called a warrant or assumption, right? So this, you know, fact that, you know, Rick has fair skin is based on the assumption or the warrant, which is the rhetorical use of the word warrant as opposed to the legal use. And think about this for a second. A warrant in its legal sense is in fact predicated upon or based upon an assumption that so-and-so at this particular address is engaged in criminal activity, therefore we're going to search the premises and or the person. That is supposed to have been, that assumption is supposed to have been validated through some kind of evidence, whether video recording or some other kind of forensic evidence that a magistrate or judge looks at and agrees like, yes, okay, based on this evidence, you know, we can make the following assumption that this place needs to be investigated. So that's where the legal sense of the word warrant comes in. But in an argument like this, right, it's in a kind of conceptual verbal assumption that people with fair skin, red hair, and freckles usually get sunburnt easily. There's that qualifier usually, because not all of them do. And how would you support that assumption? Well, those people have little melanin in their skin, and of course, melanin protects against sunburn. We know that for a fact. And this, of course, is what I'm asking you to do in all of your essays. You know, if you think of, where is it? Like here, essay 1 over the very kind of broad topic of erasing racial injustice, and then you get to choose, you know, one of these topics or come up with one of your own. But I'm asking you to very clearly follow this outline, right? And what I've done is broken it down into paragraphs here for you in a logical order. Notice that in between every paragraph, it says smooth logical transition sentence, not a word like next or secondly or therefore or however, but an entire sentence that moves you from one paragraph to the next. So it's, smooth and logical in the order. But what I'm asking you to do is, as you can see, provide facts, right? Facts all the way throughout your paper. So you can't simply just give your opinion. You have to back up your argument with facts. So going back here, this is what I'm talking about. Support your argument with facts in your essay. And then once you reach that conclusion, there can, of course, be what we call a counterclaim that, okay, well, Rick's parents both have fair skin, red hair, and freckles, and they never seem to get sunburned, however much they sit outside, right? So that flies in the face that, Rick will probably get sunburned, because if you look at his parents, they're not usually. So yeah, there you go. Basic argument. The ingredients, if you will, of a basic argument. And keep in mind that, a logical argument needs to be linear from point A to point B. Okay, well, here we go. First type of reasoning is called induction. And in this kind of verbose definition of mine, what I'm basically saying here is that, as this diagram is showing right here, is that it starts from a very kind of specific and therefore narrowed point at the top of the triangle, a very specific kind of idea, and it keeps building upon that specificity with more facts, what we call an accretion of facts or buildup of facts. And then it finally makes at the end a conclusion in a generalized way based on all of these facts. But notice right here in this, after you have this buildup of facts, that you have something called an inductive leap or leap of faith, right? And it says down here, nota bene or note well is what that abbreviation means. It says, in inductive arguments, although the evidence will likely, notice, I qualified it. I didn't say it will make the conclusion true. I said it will likely make the conclusion true. It is very possible for the conclusion to be false, even though the evidence is sound. And I'll give an example of this. So here's an easy, kind of verbal example of this structure. So you build up an accretion of data or facts. You look at a creature and it has gills. You look at another creature and it has gills, and another, and dot dot dot. So you have amassed thousands of creatures that all have gills, and you make this inductive leap before the conclusion, and you say, well, therefore, all fish have gills. And sort of, by definition, right now, all fish have gills. That's what defines a fish, as opposed to, say, a dolphin, a whale, other kind of seagoing creature that breathes air in the water. So this argument right here is going to be complicated by the inductive leap. So my cat has fur, piece of evidence. Another piece of evidence, my neighbor's cat has fur. Cats at the pet store all have fur. All cats I have seen have fur. And then you do this inductive leap and you say, therefore, all cats have fur. And I think you all probably know where I'm going with this. There is such a creature as a hairless cat, or also known as the Sphinx cat, because it's typically native to Egypt, right? It has no body hair, but it is nonetheless a feline. So how would you like to wake up to that every morning? But it's true, it is a cat. So you can see here, if you look at the, sort of genus of it. It's a type of cat. So anyway, let me get back to this. So this particular argument breaks down because we took an inductive leap here. We said, well, I'm going to take this, leap of faith or inductive leap that all cats have fur. But that's not always true. And so let me give you an example. Let's say you have two people. They are coworkers, so that's a fact. Let's say Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith. And we're going to build up a bunch of facts like this. Fact, 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 fact. So fact, Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith are coworkers. Fact, Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith were seen arguing at the copy machine on Wednesday. Another fact, Mr. Jones was found dead in his apartment at 10 p.m. Wednesday night. Another fact, Mr. Jones was killed with a .45 handgun because of ballistics and forensics. We can verify that. Mr. Smith owns a .45 handgun registered in his name. And another fact, Mr. Smith was not at work the next day on Thursday. So fact, 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 fact. We therefore draw the conclusion, right, down here, broad general, that based on all these facts, Mr. Smith killed Mr. Jones. Well, I think many of us have seen enough CIS and NCI and all these other kind of crime television shows that that's called circumstantial evidence, right? That based on the circumstances, it appears as though Mr. Smith did this. However, someone can be framed, right? There can be other mitigating factors. So we make these kinds of judgments daily in our life, right? Think about, the accretion of data and facts. You have based your choice for a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, spouse, whatever. You've known them a certain time, they behave this way around you and around others and your family, and fact, 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 fact. Every day you wake up and they behave this way. Then you come to the conclusion, well, this must be a wonderful person. I'm going to become involved with that person. And, months, maybe even years go by, and then all of a sudden, maybe that general conclusion that that's a wonderful person is not being played out because, people are not static things. People evolve and change, right? But we do base our assumption of many things in the world and how they operate on this inductive argument flow. Every time you go pick out a tomato or an apple at a store, you're using inductive reasoning based on, well, if the tomato is too hard or tomato is too soft, right? Based on accretion of evidence in your experience. Okay, so induction is pretty easy to understand. We use it all the time, though it's a bit faulty. The one that's a little more rigorous that we use less often, but is nonetheless as valid, is called deduction or deductive argument. And it's just the opposite, as you can see in the triangle, right? Instead of going from specific to general, it goes from general to specific or broad to narrow. Now, one of the problems, just as we had the inductive leap being part of the problem with induction, one of the problems with deduction, as I'm going to point out, is that you can have a valid deductive argument, but it may not also be true. So truth and validity are not the same in logic. So I'll say that one more time. Truth and validity are not the same in logic. You can have a well-formed and outlined essay, but it may not also be true. And what you, of course, are striving for is both a valid and a true argument. And what we try to do is we look at the premises, which is a plural of premise. So you have a major and minor premise, a broad and a narrowed premise. A premise, you could say, is like an assumption. And it says here, like an inductive argument, the conclusion of a deductive argument may also be false because one or both of the premises or assumptions is false. So just because it may be well ordered like this in a deductive way does not mean that either or both of these premises are true or accurate. So here's a couple examples to get us going on this. So we're going to take a broad major premise, and when we say major, we mean broad in the sense that it applies to everything or all people in this case, and therefore it's not specific to a particular person. So this major premise is broad, as you can see here in the first part. It's the widest part here in the diagram. So all people who perform with courage and determination in a crisis are great leaders. Okay. So if you have a statement like this, where it just begins with people who do X, Y, or Z, then we have to automatically assume that it means all people. Otherwise, there would be a qualifier, as I mentioned before, in front of it. Something like some people or many people or most people, right? Once you put a qualifier in front of it, then that changes the parameters, if you will, of the argument. But again, if it just begins with people or cats instead of some cats, then we have to say, okay, all of this category, in this case, the category being people. So all people who do this are great leaders, all right? Then we're going to move from this broad idea to a more narrowed one. So you can see this minor premise is here in this area is more narrowed than the major premise, okay? And we're going to narrow the category of people or all people. We're going to narrow it to a particular person. So certainly Abraham Lincoln was, a person, specific person. So Lincoln performed with courage and determination in a crisis, obviously referring to the Civil War. So we went from broad to specific, and based on the interrelation of these two, of the major premise and the minor premise, we're going to draw the conclusion. So conclusion, and by the way, there's that ... again. Again, if it is upside down, meaning, there's a point at the bottom and then two at the top in a triangle, the upside down version of this means because. So conclusion, therefore, Lincoln was a great leader. Okay. Pretty simple conclusion down here. So let's take another example of this, and we're going to work this one through in the next page. So this is perhaps the most famous deductive syllogism, we'll call it, or argument. It could say humans are mortal, but this idea of all humans is the same thing, right? So like above where it says people who do this, right? I inserted in brackets all to remind you that, it's not some or most, it's all people. And the same thing here. It's not some humans, but all humans are mortal. Well, what does it mean to be mortal? It means to be, have the ability and capacity to die, which of course is what defines us as human beings. Because if you're immortal, you never die, and therefore you're a god or a goddess, or a transformer. So all humans are mortal, and then narrow it down, the entire category of humans, to, in this case, one person. So Socrates, the teacher of Plato, Socrates was a human. Conclusion, ... Therefore, Socrates was mortal. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Socrates refused to stop teaching his ideas of truth and democracy and virtues in Athens. And here he is about to drink some poison or hemlock in prison because the Athenian officials and senators said, you have to leave or stop preaching. And of course, he's not going to do either. And so they give him the choice to either be executed or to kill himself, and he kills himself. Anyhow, so, he dies famously, sort of. So Socrates was mortal. All right. Well, pretty simple categorical syllogism, we call it. And that's what we're moving on to now on the next page. So it's a three-part deductive argument, right, with a major premise, minor premise, conclusion. It can be analyzed and tested for its validity through this following Venn diagram method. And it's a little difficult to show you, with a computer rather than, say, on a chalkboard or dry erase board in a classroom, but I'll do my best here, so if you hang on with me. There are, in fact, rules for a categorical syllogism here. This is on page 2 of your handout. Or is it page 3? Sorry. So in order to understand this syllogism, to analyze it, and then to test for its validity and truth, as you see over here, we have to go step by step in a very kind of rigid way. Otherwise, we will, like a mathematical problem, we will fail to get the right answer if we skip a step or mess up one of the steps. So here it is in basic format, right? The major premise, a minor premise, and conclusion. So you already have it written down. That's step 1. Step 2 is to what we call term the syllogism, to put it in specific terms. And what that means is, one of the rules is it says a syllogism can contain only 3 terms, A, B, and C. A premise, the major or minor's premise, can only be all, no, or qualified, which is some. So those 3 words can only appear at the beginning of each major or minor premise. So let's look at this step 2 for a second. So it is saying here that all of the class or category of things that are human, we're going to call that A, because of course it's the first term, right? It's the first thing that we encounter in this major premise. All what? All humans, all A. And then the next thing we have is a verb here, so we don't do anything with that really, because it's a verb, it's not a category. It's an action verb, or to be verb. The next thing we encounter is the category of mortal or mortality. So that's a new thing, different from humans, and we give it the letter B. Then we move on to the next minor premise here. And we say, okay, well, Socrates is a brand new term. Haven't had that yet, so we'll give that the letter C because they already have A and B. And then you have another verb here, past tense. It's still a verb. And then we have a human. But notice this, what do you call it, that dotted line in gray that goes from A to A. And I put that there to show you that rather than include a new term D, which remember we're not allowed to do, you can only have A, B, and C as the terms. That's, again, rule number, right, only 3 terms. That's rule number 1. So rather than give it a new term, we just use A again, because in fact, this is the singular of this category. This is the plural, humans, and this is the singular, but it's still the same category. Human or humans, still, Homo sapiens sapiens, right? Okay, so my major premise and minor premise are done. Then we can go to the conclusion, ... And the conclusion is, therefore, Socrates, C, was B, mortal. Okay, so this step 2 here, the entire thing is called terming your syllogism. Okay, and that has to be done correctly to, again, achieve the right answer. Once you've done step 2, then you move to step 3, and it's really even more simplified, because what you're doing is you're condensing or collapsing everything you just did in step 2 down to kind of like a mathematical equation, okay? So notice that each one of these begin with all, okay, in front of it, which is, we're reminded that that's an affirmative premise. And the reason they have all in front of it in step 3 is because if we go back and look, they all are affirmative, meaning certainly the first one, it says all humans. And then the minor premise says Socrates, but, like Socrates's leg didn't just die, his entire body died, right? His entire body was human. So it has to be all of Socrates. And the same is true with the conclusion that, all of Socrates died, not just part of him. So in each one of these, it's all humans, all Socrates, and all Socrates. So all A, and we have the equal sign, but here this was, R. All A is B, or all C was A, all C is B. And that's what transpires over here in step 3. All A equals B, or is B. All C is A, therefore all C is B, okay? So once we have condensed it like this in step 3, and remember, if this is, I'm going too quickly for you, you can go back and just, rewind the video to review what I said to get it down. Once you have step 3 done, then you move to the last step, which is using the Venn diagram to check the validity and the truth. So the first thing that you have to do, and again, remember, like a mathematical equation, don't jump ahead because you'll, end up with the wrong answer. You have to go step by step. So how do you first visually show this part? How do you show that all of the A equals B? Well, you first would put this giant or big circle of B right here. And then, because you want to say all A is B, or all A belongs to or is part of B, it doesn't say it the other way around. It doesn't say all B is A. It says all A belongs to or is part of B. Well, that means that you put all of A, in this case, the second smaller circle, inside of B. So everything that constitutes or belongs to or is part of A is now inside of B or equals B or is part of B. Okay, makes sense. And using the same process and logic, how do you show that everything that is C equals or belongs to A? Well, you put an even smaller circle of everything that is C inside of A. Same line of reasoning, same logic. And the conclusion says, therefore, all C equals to or is part of or belongs to B. All C is B. Right? So is that right? So does all of C belong to, is it part of B? Well, yes, all C is automatically, in this case, inside of B. So this syllogism, this argument, it checks off as valid, but is it also true? Well, did Socrates die? Yes, as I just showed you, he was mortal and he died, sort of famously so. Okay. However, these categorical syllogisms can be tricky and prove to be, like a logical argument or valid argument, but not true at the same time. And there are 4 examples down here at the bottom that you could take a stab at. I'm going to do a couple of these here. These over here have a couple of images to show you how this works. All right, so it's color-coded this time. So it's the same steps, Geniuses have hangups. Trump has hangups. Therefore, Trump is a genius. Well, okay, that's what the argument says. Now let's go over here and term that. So geniuses is the first category. Then B is the new second category, hangups. Then Trump is yet another new category, so that's C. And we already have hangups again, so we'll just use B again. And we already have Trump here, so we use C again. And we already have A or genius. And remember, like human versus humans, singular versus plural, we are still the same category. Plural here, singular here, but still A. Okay. And geniuses, Trump, these are all going to be affirmative, like all geniuses, all Trump, not part of him, but all of him has hangups. So all A is B right there, all A is B, all C is B, all C is B, and the conclusion is all C is A, all C is A. Okay, so we've done step 3, we've termed it. How do you then show that we take this first one, all A equals B, just like we did with the Socrates and mortality one? How do we show that all of A, the blue, belongs to or is part of B? Well, we draw a big circle of B here, in this case orange, and then we put everything that is blue, A, inside of B. It can't be outside of or touching B, it's going to be inside of B. So that's correct, all A equals B. And then how do we visually show all C equals B? Well, we put all of C inside of B, as shown here with the red, that's the red C. And then the conclusion says all C equals A. Oh, well, wait a minute. All C equals A? Actually, no. Some of the C, as you can see, is clearly outside of A. So this is neither a valid argument, it's not validly constructed, nor obviously is it true that Trump is a genius. I think that's pretty patently, obviously clear. But why? Well, because it violated one of the rules. Again, remember there are 7 rules. It violated this number 6 rule about the middle term. So there's another one here. Remember, let me go back to tell you that the 3 different premises can be all, no, or some meaning qualified. And 2 of the rules, 4 and 5, are kind of the same, but for each one. So if there's one negative premise, remember a premise is one of these top 2 major premise or minor premise. It says if one is negative, meaning it's a no, like no people do X, Y, or Z, that's no or negative. So if one of those premises, major or minor, is negative or no, then the conclusion must also be no or negative. That's an important rule, as well as if one premise is qualified with some, like some people or many people or most people, that's qualifying, then the conclusion must also be qualified. Okay. Well, that comes into play here with this next one, which is also at the bottom of page 3. So some parrots are not troublesome. All parrots are pets. Therefore, no pets are troublesome. And just right away, you can see, well, wait a minute. The rule said if some is one of the premises, if you have a qualified premise, then you must have a qualified conclusion. But in fact, what we have here is all 3, some, all, and no. So that should send off, alarm bells right away. But again, you would just proceed and, go ahead and term it. Some parrots, that's the first category. Troublesome is the next category. Parrots we already have, so use A again, so on. And then once you term it, you can then put it into a diagram. So how do you show that sum A equals B? Well, clearly, some of the A, in this case, the blue, needs to overlap with the orange, which it's doing, okay? And then how do you show the next premise, which is all A equals C? Well, that means that everything that is C must encompass entirely A. As you can see here with the red is showing you that it entirely encompasses A. But then the conclusion says no C touches, equals, or belongs to B. Well, is that true? Well, no, clearly not, because the red line of C is going, a red circle of C is going inside of the orange circle of B. And therefore, just on the face of it, we can see it's not valid. And it's also certainly not true that no pets are troublesome. Of course, many pets are troublesome. So yeah, pretty simple way to do categorical syllogisms. You guys can take a stab at these over here on the left-hand side, dogs and Fido and Jesuits and priests. All right, let's move on to the main portion of this handout, which are logical fallacies. And this will, if you really pay attention to this will really help you in doing well on the logical fallacies quiz of module 2. So there are 2 categories of logical fallacies. One, fallacies resulting from oversimplifying, and then later in the handout, fallacies resulting from ignoring the issue. These latter, Roman numeral 2, they're more pernicious or evil because they are often deliberate. Whereas in the first category, it's often a matter of simple logic that you're not following. So I have these images and examples along the way, and I'll kind of break some down for you. Try not to, talk too long here, but I do want to ensure that you get these. And by the way, these are the most common logical fallacies. There are many, many more that I have not included, but these are the most common, both in speech and writing. And the whole point, of course, of this exercise and quiz and module is that on the one hand, you learn to recognize logical fallacies in your own writing and speech, and therefore don't commit them, because your argument, the ideas you're putting forth, will become unconvincing, and people can poke holes in your argument, so to speak. But also, you should learn them well enough to be able to detect them in other people's writing and speech, so that you're not tricked or duped by politicians or salesmen or people who are trying to pull one over on you, so to speak. All right. So this first category, oversimplifying. The first and most common one that I mentioned earlier was called overstatement, which stereotyping is a version of overstatement. It occurs when a generalization is unqualified. So we talked about this before with the qualifier of some, or Rick and his, red freckles. He will usually or probably get sunburned, right? Not automatically. So qualifiers are incredibly important to use in your speech and writing, so you do not commit an overstatement. So make sure you're including qualifiers like may. People may do this, they could do this, they possibly could do this. Many people, not all people. Some people, nearly all, which is not the same as all. A majority, right? Someone might do something as opposed to will do something. And virtually, like virtually all people. So those are examples of qualifiers, and use them consistently throughout your speech and writing. So the way to detect them in the logical fallacies quiz is if you have these trigger words, so to speak. Like if you have a statement that says, everyone does X, Y, or Z, or people always do blah, 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 or this never happens, right? Unless you're, somehow God or, omniscient, you can never say that something never happens or never will happen, right? We can't predict the future. So the common stereotyping, right, is a type of overstatement. And all of these categories and more really have stereotypes in them, whether it's, let's say religious, all Catholic priests are child molesters, or all Catholic priests are winos because they drink wine all the time in mass, or all Republicans are white racists. That's not true. Or all liberal Democrats are people of color. That's not true. Yeah, and so on. So we recognize stereotypes and, avoid them. An easy one that's, pretty pernicious is the unfortunate and racial stereotype of all African Americans like fried chicken. Well, you know what? Not only is that racist, but it's illogical, because if you can simply find one African American who's, say, a vegan or vegetarian, that one person throws off the entire argument. You can't say all. You might say some or many, right? And then, of course, we would ask you to provide statistics if you're going to make that kind of claim. Don't just throw out an opinion about something without backing up with facts. Remember, right? Fact, 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 based on sources, So here's an example. Children love clowns. So it doesn't say some children, and therefore we have to say all children. Well, it's not true. All children do not love clowns. If you've ever seen them around the clown or at a party, some cry. Or lawyers are only interested in making money. No, many are, but not all. So there's such a thing as, and some of you in criminal justice might know this, there's something called pro bono work, which from Latin means for free, or in this case, the public good, but you're doing something for free or without pay. So if you ever do pro bono work, there's the ABA, American Bar Association, that means that, right, your attorney must have every year that they have a law license, they must have a certain amount of pro bono work. And if you ever need an attorney but can't afford one, then ask him or her if, hey, could you do this case pro bono? They may say no, but it's certainly worth knowing about and asking. Another example of where attorneys aren't necessarily making money is what's called a public defender, right? So this is the kind, if you remember the Miranda law or Miranda disclaimer, if you don't have an attorney, you have the right to counsel, if or when someone might be arrested. And that's appointed by the state, by the county, by the state itself, or even at the federal level. That is, these public defenders, generally speaking, make a lot less money than private firm corporate lawyers, right? So it's not accurate and fair to say that all lawyers are interested in making money. You would need to qualify that to some or many or so on. Moving to B, hasty generalization, it's very similar to overstatement, but the difference is it tries to throw in one or two pieces of evidence and then reach a conclusion quickly, thus the hasty part of it. So in this first example, it begins with the conclusion, this fertilizer is useless. Grow Quick fertilizer is useless, and gives two pieces of evidence. Since we applied it last week, so that's duration or time, our grass has remained brown. So forensic evidence, looking empirically with our eyes, the grass is brown. So during this time, a week, the grass is brown. Based on that little evidence, the conclusion that it's useless. Well, what other possible reasons might there be for the grass being brown? Well, there could have been a pre-existing condition, like there's some kind of disease under the grass or the soil, or grub worms or something. You may have applied too much, or you may have applied too little, right? So that's too quick of a conclusion to reach based on that little bit of evidence. Or here's this similar structure where you begin with the conclusion first. Political life must lead many to sexual frustration. And then the pieces of evidence given are in the last 6 months, so there's that time duration, which is not even a year. In the last 6 months, media has written about 5 members of Congress who have either confessed to sexual harassment or have resigned due to sexual harassment charges. So 5 members in 6 months. And how many members of Congress are there? Well, I think you may remember, I hope you do, that the United States Senate, because there are 50 states, each state has 2 senators, so 2 times 50 equals 100, right? So this number is fixed. It's always 100. And then its counterpart in the legislative body, that is the other side of the Congress, so to speak, is the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives is not a fixed number. It's based on population of states, and it fluctuates. But right now it's at 435, right? And so 435 plus 100, that's 535 members of Congress. In this case, it said 5 members of Congress in 6 months. So it's too small of a sample, we would say, to draw that kind of conclusion. So don't make that quick hasty generalization. Make sure you have enough facts and data. Another similar type of argument called a forced hypothesis is when you either one, you don't have enough evidence, sufficient evidence to support your conclusion, or two, the evidence can be explained more simply by a different idea or different hypothesis, is when you have a forced hypothesis. Hypothesis, some of you at Grambling who've taken science may recall, it's an educated guess. And, kind of generally speaking, it is. But you're not able to tell how well your hypothesis functions until you do an experiment, right? And the empirical data from the experiment will tell whether your hypothesis is valid or not. But when you have a forced hypothesis, that means that you have this idea, this kind of conclusion you want to reach, and even though the data may show X, Y, or Z, you are going to still say it's A, B, or C. You're going to kind of divert the answer, if you will. So here's a couple of quick easy examples. Here's the piece of evidence. Professor Johnson's students received either A's or B's last semester. ... Therefore, you must be an excellent teacher. What? I can guarantee you that teaching excellence has really little to do with A's or B's. I mean, there's an indirect correlation, probably, certainly not direct correlation. So you all know as students that students can earn A's or B's for a number of reasons. He could be a lenient teacher and have what we call grade inflation, just give out A's or B's. Or you have a bunch of students who worked really hard, right? Collectively. Or you have students who may not have worked as hard, but they were just intellectually gifted or bright, or a combination thereof, right? Because you all know that any particular class or section, we call it, is sort of a crapshoot or a roll of the dice, and which students are in which section or which class, right? It's just based on people's schedules and who can convene at whatever time or whatever. So this is clearly, obviously, illogical to argue that he's excellent because of the A's or B's. Keep that in mind the next time you're, on Twitter looking at the do take, the don't take, or ratemyprofessor.com. High grades does not, mean or translate to teaching excellence. Everyone clapped after Sophia's recital, so she must be a wonderful pianist. Not necessarily, right? I think we've all been in public or semi-public situations where decorum and polite society kind of dictates that you clap or you give someone some props because of a performance, even though you may not think it was the bee's knees or awesome, right? So can't automatically force that conclusion or hypothesis. All right, letter D, non sequitur is how you said that, non sequitur. It comes from, the root of the word comes from sequi, meaning to follow. So we have words like sequel and sequence and segue. That's how you say that word, segue, like segue of a joke, segue in a novel, segue the thing that you balance on a ride. So a non sequitur, when you have the non in front of it, right, means it does not follow. So normally something, going back to that diagram I showed you about an argument, right? It needs to go from point A to point B. So A or B follows A then B. But if it does not follow, then that is because one or two reasons. Because either whatever the connection the arguer sees, meaning you, the writer, in an essay, because whatever connection you see, the arguer is not made clear to the audience. So in your head, it's clear, but you didn't actually delineate the steps in your writing of how you arrived at that conclusion. Or two, the evidence or reasons offered are irrelevant to the conclusion. Okay, so for example, if Donald Trump could accomplish all this as a private citizen, just imagine what he could do if elected president. Well, I think that's pretty obvious. I use this example because many people who voted for Trump in 2000, well, both years, 2016, 2020, were making this kind of claim that he was such a great businessman, and that's what we need in office, right? But as a later image I have down here shows you, he had all of these bankruptcies and failures in his businesses. So, what makes him such a winner, such a great businessman? Well, certainly not his record, right? So you can't say that his business life will translate automatically to what do you call it? Being a public servant, because the private citizen, the way you run a business, right? Think of what he did right before he was elected. He was on The Apprentice. You're fired. That was the whole sort of hook, if you will, of that show, that people were waiting to see someone get fired. But the public sector, the government, right? You can't automatically go around firing people. He tried to do his, enough damage and did quite a bit, but the two don't function the same. So it does not follow that just because he did this in this sector arena that he would therefore be great in this other arena. Valencia will certainly get a good grade in physics because she loved her biology class. Well, I think on the surface of it, you can see automatically it does not follow, non sequitur, that simply because she liked biology, which has comparatively relatively little mathematics, that she's going to do well in physics, right? They're both, broadly speaking, in the category of sciences, but they're quite vastly different disciplines in many ways. All right, so let's move to one of the more common ones, along with overstatement, that we began, and this is slippery slope. This particular fallacy, as I say here, it's the most commonly misidentified, and it's really, you're obligated as an educated person to know what it is and how to detect it, and of course how to avoid it. So a slippery slope is really a problem of cause and effect. And it says here, it's an argument, and it's in quotation mark, that asserts that we should not proceed with step A because if we do, the terrible consequences of X, Y, and Z will occur. And so it assumes that without evidence, usually, that terrible consequences will, not may occur, but will occur. So this little diagram kind of points out what the basic argument or fallacy is. So it's saying, don't do this up here. Don't start with A, B, or C, because once you do, really, you only have to start with A. Because once you do, the results of X, Y, and Z down here at the bottom will automatically occur. And so this slope idea, this slippery slope, has its roots in the Sisyphus character in Greek mythology, right? It says here, Zeus punished him for cheating death twice. And his punishment was to roll an immense boulder up a hill for it only to roll down every time to the top. So he was condemned to this, you know, right here, this, okay, I'm going to roll a boulder to the top of the hill, but just before he'd get to the summit or the top, it would roll back down and he had to start again. So he could never avoid the slippery slope because he cheated death twice and upset Zeus. So the slippery slope argument, it does not qualify, as I've mentioned before, and it's triggered by words like will. This will happen. Not it may happen or it might happen or it could happen, but it will happen. So here it says, well, let me take this second one that's probably easier to understand. If we allow the government to legalize marijuana, so that's what is being called A here. Let's not do this. Let's not start A because it will just take us down this path to Z. So if we allow the government to legalize marijuana, it will next legalize cocaine and heroin. ... Before long, our kids will be addicted to hard drugs. Well, folks, that's obviously illogical, but it's what's called the gateway drug argument, right? You could even back it up in terms of substance, and you could say, if we allow children to smoke cigarettes, then they'll start smoking marijuana, and before you know it, before too long, they will be, addicted to hard drugs. Not true. Now, you could keep the same structured argument and qualify it, and it would be valid and to some degree true. You could say, if teenagers smoke cigarettes, some of them may go on to try marijuana, and some of those may go on to try harder drugs like cocaine or heroin, and some of those may become addicted. But notice in each one of those trajectories, if you will, or steps, I qualified it, some, and some. I didn't say all. And I also said they may become. So it's pretty simple to avoid a slippery slope. You don't use the word will because, like it says here, unless you're God, you cannot predict the future, right? As I mentioned Sisyphus. Okay. Moving on to the false dilemma. A dilemma itself, think of the word dilemma, the prefix here, di, meaning two, like dichotomy, two things, means there are two things, but in this case, there's a false construct of two things. In other words, there's typically more than two ways to look at it. We also call this the either or fallacy because often either or is in the sentence, and that's one way to look for the presence of this fallacy is there an or in it, or certainly if there's an either or, it's probably going to be notice I qualified it as a probably, it's probably going to be a false dilemma fallacy. But what I've done here, this image here, is using a bull, taking the bull by the horns. If you've ever heard that expression, it means to confront your issue or problem head on and not to avoid it. And of course, there are two horns on a bull. And a dilemma, first of all, is of course, that classic cliche between a rock and a hard place. So a rock is hard, a hard place is hard. So it's like neither one is good. But typically speaking, and I'm qualifying it right there, there's more than just either or. Or if you've ever heard, someone in your family say, you're going to do it my way, or, it's the highway, you can get out, you can leave. That things are always black or white, that there are no shades of gray. That's not true, that things are only black and white. In fact, as you grow older, the older you get, the more you realize that life is actually very complicated, and there are often more shades of gray, if you will, than things being black and white. Some of you may disagree with this, but in our current world, and really we could say always, you might say, well, people are born male or female. Like, well, no, actually, there's a percentage of people who, in fact, are born with both gonads, both types of sex organs. And so it's a real thing. It's not a very, high percentage of people, obviously. But, they're human beings, and they just have to have what we might otherwise call a genetic anomaly. So, you can go read about how prevalent it is, or, actual issue. Or that you're only a Christian. If you're not a Christian, you're an infidel, or vice versa. Or you're a Republican or Democrat, but you can't be an independent, right? So let's not think in black and white either or terms, right? Like this obvious, incorrect statement here. Students must be either good students or good athletes. Well, no, the possible other choices are students could be good students or bad athletes. They could be bad students and bad athletes. And they could be bad students and good athletes, right? All four of those categories could appear. And notice right there, there's the either and the or, right? That's the either or fallacy, we often call it. So I thought you were a good person, but you were not at church today. So this is not using either or, but it's constructing it in a, black or white, yes or no situation, right? Like, you're only a good person if you go to church. What? Well, maybe you have something crucial to take care of, or maybe church isn't for you, but you still believe in God, or you're still spiritual and you pray and so on, right? So fallacy to condemn and judge people because they don't behave like you do. You will have to quit that high pressure job, or you will get an ulcer. Well, no, you could take time off. You could, rearrange your work schedule. You could, delegate your authority to other people, or, a number of other possibilities, but not necessarily having to quit. And this is a fairly common one. If you really love me, so it's really, black or white, yes or no, my way or the highway. If you really love me, you would do this thing for me. And you can insert whatever you want here. And hopefully you're not a person who made that kind of ultimatum, we call it, right? It's illogical, So please avoid those. So a false analogy. An analogy is two dissimilar things, and you highlight the similarities. So Let me give you an example. Some years ago, before I came to Grambling, actually, I taught at the University of Colorado at Boulder, which colloquially or locally they call CU. And it is right next to, as you can see here, the Rocky Mountain chain. So this is the campus down here. And this is what they call the foothills, or the beginning of the Rocky Mountain chain in Colorado, looking toward the west. And if I said that the Rocky Mountain chain, that the Rocky Mountain chain is the dinosaur's back, you would make the assumption that, oh, well, because a dinosaur's back, think of cartoons where kids see this or whatever representations of dinosaurs, it's fairly rough and jagged, dinosaur's back. And so is the foothills here of the Rocky Mountains, right? Jagged and rough. So, yeah, I see I taught in this building, but my office was over here. Yeah. Anyway, so that's taking two dissimilar things, a mountain chain and a dinosaur's back, and showing what the similarity is, in this case, jaggedness or roughness. All right. Well, a false analogy is trying to shove two dissimilar things, two different things together and trying to make the similarities work when in fact they don't. So here's an example. This must be a great car for like the finest watches in the world. It was made in Switzerland. Well, okay, it is true that Switzerland is known for its fine watches, or chronometers, we might say. Many of you, I imagine, are familiar with the most premier Swiss chronometer. Let's find a sample of it here. So you'll see if you blow up this, called the face. You'll see here, Swiss made, right? Okay. And most really fine watches, Tag Heuer and Bulova and of course Rolex, are made in they're made in Switzerland. So it's true. All right. But how many of you know of cars that are made in Switzerland, right? Probably none of you, right? There's Omega, right? Rolex again. And they all, at the bottom, they'll say Swiss made. Swiss made. So we can't really draw that analogy, but we could say, all right, well, if we're talking about a car, let's change the parameters of this and say, okay, this must be a great car for like the finest blank in the world. It was made in where? Well, what are some of the finest cars in the world? Maserati. That's why, because I misspelled it. Or the Ferrari, right? Or the Bugatti. They're all made in Italy, okay? So, right, it's Bugatti is well, it's now in France, but it started in Italy. Anyway, so going back to any one of these cards, you could say this must be a great car for like the finest what? Wines or art. You think of Florence or Italian wines. For like the finest wines in the world, it was made in Switzerland. I mean, sorry, in Italy. Then the analogy would work, taking fine wine or fine cars or whatever, because they're both made in Italy. Let's see. Making people register their own guns, handguns, rifles, is like the Nazis making the Jews register with their government. The policy is crazy. So this is someone who doesn't want to have guns registered, right? And they're saying the policy is crazy, and there are a lot of NRA gun-toting members who think that gun registration is a way to keep track of people, and only a government like a fascist government like the Nazi Third Reich that of course made the Jews register is it's that's stepping down the road of having a fascist Nazi government, right? And clearly that's a false analogy, because one is born a Jew typically. You can convert to Judaism, but if your parents are Jewish and you become Jewish and are raised Jewish, you often don't have a choice in the matter from a long ancestry and lineage. But also, when it comes to guns, you do have a choice. You don't have to own a gun. It's in the Second Amendment, but it doesn't say you must own a gun. You have the right to own a gun, but you're not required to. So that's certainly a false analogy in the argument. All right, let's move on. This is the last one in this section, section 1 on oversimplifying, and it's called post hoc. The entire phrase is post hoc ergo propter hoc, meaning after this, therefore because of it. And sort of like the slippery slope, this is a bit of a cause and effect problem. Remember that I said that a logical argument must have point A and end up with point B, or be linear, right? Well, what this does is it basically reverses the two, that is putting the point A or the conclusion at the end. And the reason I have a little voodoo doll here is because superstitions are a type of post hoc fallacy, right? Like here's an example. Before I play the game, I need to wash my lucky underwear or wear my lucky underwear for the game, right? Because every time I've worn my lucky underwear, we've won the game, right? That's why they're lucky. I'm pretty sure that's not why you won the game. You won for, countless variable factors of your teammates and the other team's lack of, performance. So one type of, you might think of it as a superstition if you're not Catholic. And if you are Catholic, apologize, I'm not trying to call out your religion, but over the years and centuries, Protestants have maligned or ridiculed Catholics for like kneeling down at an altar and praying to the statue of the Virgin Mary, as opposed to just, kneeling and praying. So at a Catholic, in a Catholic church, if you've ever been in one, there are often lots of ornaments and statues, right? Like you see here, what we call a crucifix over here. It's just a cross. There's no body on it, but a Christ's body on it. It's called a crucifix, or the statue of the Virgin Mary. So if you see someone kneeling down in front of a statue like that to pray or to light a candle, then these candles you may see people lighting when they walk into a church, right? If you've ever been inside a Catholic church, then it's not a criticism of their belief system. It's a criticism by Protestants or those who disbelieve, right? See, there's a statue of the Virgin Mary with candles in front of it. That when you light the candle and you kneel down and pray in front of a statue, that makes your prayer more serious and better heard, if you will, by God or Jesus or Mother Mary. And people who don't believe in statues or rosaries, for that matter, they would say you don't need these idols or these trinkets to pray with. It should come from your mind, your heart. Okay, so please, avoid post hoc fallacies and superstitions. The second part here, resulting from ignoring the issue, as I said earlier, are more pernicious. If you don't know that college level word, please learn it. It typically means reprehensible or evil or heinous. The reason they are is because often, and so there I'm qualifying it, not always, but often the speaker or writer knows exactly what they're doing, and they're trying to trip you up or trying to turn the argument or pivot, we would say, away from your attack or your probing question to get you off track, because they don't really want to answer the question. So begging the question is the first one. And the question here is not something that's being asked, like, with a question mark. But like it says here, the question is not an actual question, but whatever issue or topic is under discussion or debate. To beg means to elicit or draw forth an unreasonable answer. And so in your quiz, keep an eye out for, phrases or words like the fact is, or as we can see, or obviously, clearly. Those have to be proven before they can be stated. Like you can't say clearly, right, without having proven that it's clear. So it tries to bring forth an answer when typically one has not been proven or is evident based on the facts. Here's a common one, right? Prosecutor to defendant. So, the state prosecutor to the person on trial. So, how did you feel when you killed your wife? So, if you had a good attorney, whether, pro bono, public defender or what, you would hope that attorney says, objection, Your Honor, leading the witness, meaning leading the witness who's on the witness stand to the answer of a question that is, out of bounds, right? In other words, killing your wife has not been proven. That's why you're on trial, right? And what he's trying to get you to answer is, well, how did you feel when you did this thing? Well, you haven't proven that I've done this thing. So yeah, out of bounds. This whole abortion debate about when human life begins is ridiculous. We should be thinking about the rights of the baby. Well, that's also something that hasn't really been proven, that this first part, the debate about when human life begins, is ridiculous. That's actually, there's something called viability if you are studying nursing or general biology, right? that, would you call it life if in fact at a certain, several weeks, let's say 5 weeks, taken out of the womb, it automatically dies? I don't think we would necessarily say that is life in the kind of conventional sense. But, that's what the debate is about. So we're currently having in Texas and Mississippi, and the Supreme Court is deciding this year, in fact. So in this case, the person wants us to start thinking about the rights of the baby and forget this whole part about when you define human life. Or the fact is, so there's that trigger phrase, we cannot ignore the opinions of the best movie critics. Clearly, the movie is not worth seeing. Well, okay. Do you all pay attention to movie critics? I've always wondered, like when you look at movie ratings, and it's like we'll call Rotten Tomatoes, then, who's like here on Rotten Tomatoes at 82%, right, based on 140. Okay, so who are these 146 people, right? Do they represent, what you might like? They're saying you should go see Spike Lee's movie, Chirac, which, I recommend you check out, but it may not be for you. It's based off of Aristophanes' play Lysistrata. So most of us aren't entirely swayed by movie critics, but they exist out there. And music critics and other kinds of art critics exist, but we might check it out, but it may not be automatically the way we decide. In other words, I would recommend you go listen to the album or watch the film and decide for yourself rather than some other person decide for you, like the fact is. All right, circular reasoning. This is an unfortunate, somewhat common form of fallacy, and it's typically not done maliciously. Sometimes it is, but it's typically done because the speaker or writer isn't aware that what they're saying is basically the same thing in two different versions. So remember, right, a linear path for an argument going from point A to point B. But in this case, as you can see here with the Ouroboros or Ouroboros, this ancient symbol here, the snake or dragon eating its own tail, and as it's dying but living at the same time. It's a symbol of eternity or infinity. What's happening here is that the argument starts with point A, but then goes back to point A. It doesn't ever reach a B or a conclusion. So here, I'm going to take this first example, and I'm going to highlight the word because. And imagine if there was a period after the word exciting. Basketball is exciting, period. It is such a stimulating sport. That tells us nothing new. So exciting and stimulating are synonyms. There's no real new or extra information there. The way that you get out of this circular reasoning, or as it's called, a tautology, is you give specific examples of what you mean by exciting. You can say, okay, well, there's, because, and then you list 2 or 3. Because the fans, unlike a football stadium, are much closer to the players on the court. And there's a more kind of intimacy and immediacy. Because you have the fast break. Because you have the, 3-pointer. You have all of these different, techniques, strategies, whatever, in basketball that you don't have in other games like, say, golf or chess, right? But you need to just specify what they are. Okay, same thing here. I'm going to I like the word because, and imagine if there's a period after the word teams. Girls should not play on boys' teams, period. They are not boys. Yeah, generally by definition, we'll look at that in essay 4 about sexual difference and transgender issues. But so generally we say, okay, girls should not play on boys' teams because they're not boys, but give some legitimate specific reasons, right? Because the males might be unduly harsh, let's say it's football, right? And they might want to take her out of the game by dogpiling or hurting her in a tackle, or vice versa, be unfair the other way. They might want to be lenient on her, not hurt her. In either case, it's not treating the female player equally. Or there might be some sexual tension if there's an away game, like where are they sleeping? They have their own room, where are they going to shower? Or if there's one female who falls in love or has a relationship with one of the male players, right? Then there could be some fallout and some jealousy, anger, whatever, right? So you can give legitimate reasons why they shouldn't be, but just saying because they don't have the anatomy or don't have the DNA is kind of it's not convincing. So I, Nigerian Prince Nubadola, assure you that this is my message and it is legitimate. You can trust this email and others that will follow once you send your goodwill offering of $50,000. This is sort of tongue-in-cheek because, especially in the 90s and 2000s, these kinds of email requests were rampant. They still exist, but so the reason this turns back in on itself, because he says, this is my message and it's legitimate. It's legitimate because I'm telling you, right? And you can trust this email. You can trust it because it's me. And we never met, but I'll assure you that it's true. So yeah, let's avoid circular reasoning, obviously. Red herring. Red herring is a tricky one because it is one of these pernicious, deliberate moves, right? As I say, it's a deliberate diversionary tactic. So a red herring, or herring in general, is an actual fish, and it has a particularly, strong fishy odor, right? So imagine if, we're sitting in a classroom and we're having a talk or discussion and someone knocks on the door and they have a bucket of these fish. And all of a sudden we're looking at this person, kind of noses turned up at this, bucket of fish, and we're no longer talking about whatever the issue or topic was before this person arrived. So what it's doing is it's, as it says, it's introducing a side issue that's irrelevant. What we have to do is redirect the discussion, to the issue we're talking about. So here's an example. Before we decide to hire a lawyer, so that's, what's going on, we're going to hire a lawyer. We should remember that many lawyers have been recently found guilty of corruption. Well, okay, good to know, but you know what? We're not going to hire one of those corrupt attorneys. So why even bring it up? It's not relevant to our discussion. Here's a common one that you see in different kinds of political candidate ads. The senator or councilman or sheriff or blah, blah, blah is an honest man. He loves sports and plays with his children on the weekends. So that has nothing to do with being an effective public official, right? What it's trying to do is trying to obscure his record, perhaps, of voting or lack of voting, with something that is appealing to a value, in this case, honesty. Like we all value honesty or should value honesty. But when they're conflating, that he is a family man, basically, he loves sports and plays with his children, that has nothing to do with his effectiveness as a public official, right? So don't be misled by those appeals. Remember, in the rhetorical or what is rhetoric video lecture last time, we talked about the pathos or emotionally driven argument, right? And we're often swayed by values and emotions, right? And this is one example like that. So moving on, straw man. Straw man is also one of these very deliberate and kind of evil tactics in arguing. So there is this term you should know called burning someone in effigy. Effigy is how you say that. And so an effigy is simply a false representation of someone or something, right? It's like, for example, in its most fundamental sense, if you take a selfie, the selfie is an effigy of you. You're the real thing, and the selfie, the image, is a representation, a representation of you. So there are many representations of political figures being burned this way, right? And this is Trump. It's not the real Trump, obviously, but it's a representation of Trump. And this is what people around the globe might think of Trump and his policies. And but it's also true of other candidates or figures, right? So if you're in the Middle East, right, they might make here this fake representation of Barack Obama and American flag, and as if to say, this is what we think of your policies or what we would do to you. So that's what's happening here in this argument. They create a false representation of your argument, and then they attack that false representation, right? Occurs when the arguer creates a false image or representation of the opponent and then attacks that false image. Okay. And, the straw man is not a real man, but that's what becomes attacked, not the real person, but a fake or straw person being attacked. So here's an example. Proponents of sex education want to give kids license to have sex without consequences. So like if there are high schools or even colleges where there are freely available contraceptives in the restroom, some parents might think, oh my God, we can't be having that, because that's just going to, send a signal to the kids that, they have free license to have sexual intercourse. Well, it's quite the opposite, actually, of what the people who are, desiring to provide contraceptions are doing. They're trying to have kids, if you're going to engage in that activity, then do it safely, right? But it's not like, here you go, like we're promoting it. So again, cause and effect is not equal to correlation. Or correlation does not equal cause and vice versa. So Senator Jackson is anti-woman because he voted against the anti-pornography law, which means he favors sexual violence and exploitation of women. What? Doesn't make any sense, right? So if he voted against the anti-pornography law, which simply means that people would still be allowed to print, publish, view, possess whatever pornography, because if there was a law against it, right, then it would be anti-pornography. But just because he voted that way does not mean he's anti-woman. and therefore favors sexual violence. What that is saying, if you kind of tear it apart, is that somehow pornography, every bit of it, without making any kind of discernment, is all about sexual violence and exploitation of women. Because then you say, well, what about women who produce their own pornographic content? They're not being forced by anyone to do it. They're making their own money from doing it. What about women who are in the pornography business, shooting, filming other women, right? They're, you could try to say that it's exploitation of them, but unless you can prove that, it's pretty hard to make that argument. So the straw man is a deliberate tactic and should definitely be sussed out or discerned and done away with. So ad hominem here, very common, like slippery slope and stereotyping. It's, the right here, the most common form of ad hominem is name calling. So if you're, having a discussion and it turns into what we would call an altercation of, yelling at each other with, emotional and verbal abuse, you're no longer arguing and you're committing, we call an argument to the man or to the person. And the very root of the word, right, is like, think of Homo sapiens. Ad means to in Latin. So if you're attacking the person's background rather than what they stand for, their policy, then you're not convincing anyone. Excuse me. So right here, hey, Professor Smith, we shouldn't have to read books by Sigmund Freud. Everyone knows he used cocaine, which is true. So cocaine didn't become banned as a addictive narcotic until the early part of the 20th century, early 1900s. And he was alive well before then. And so in the 1880s and 90s, lots of people in Europe and America, for that matter, used cocaine. In fact, Coca-Cola, that's where it comes from, the name. It had a trace amount of cocaine in it. And once it was outlawed, they put caffeine in it. So that, there are a lot of things wrong with Sigmund Freud's psychological ideas, but he did give us some really important key points. The conscious, the unconscious, the id, the ego, the superego, interpretation of dreams, and all of this stuff that we often still use in psychotherapy today. Or here, Susan B. Anthony, right? Why should we honor Susan B. Anthony with a commemorative coin? She was just another puritanical do-gooder. And calling her a puritanical do-gooder is actually a judgment or a slight against her. So Susan B. Anthony was, one of these, one of the main, voices in the suffrage movement to help women get the vote in 1920, along with Katie Stanton. So we ended up making a coin. What they have in here. There it is. It's a Susan B. Anthony dollar. It's worth $1. There it is, $1. And if you're going to say, why should we, commemorate her with a coin like this, it's because you are not looking at what she did in terms of helping women get equality in terms of the vote, but you're looking at, her background as a very straight-laced, thus puritanical a religious woman and always doing the right thing. So a do-gooder is a negative term as someone who's like always doing good. Like think of, someone who tattletales on you to the teacher for passing a note or whispering in class, that kind of thing. That would be we might call a do-gooder. So the ad hominem, attacking people's backgrounds rather than their policies, issues, should certainly be avoided. Appeal to authority, well, has to be the right authority. We saw this image earlier, right? So this is an unfortunate misapplication of someone's expertise or identity, right, outside of what they're successful or really professional at. So, for example, Nike or Yeezy are dope kicks because Kanye has the best style. Well, okay, if we're talking about music, maybe talk about Kanye, right? That's what he's really known for, is music, even though he has clothing line. But if you really want to, talk about how great Nike Airs are, go talk to the man, right? Michael Jordan. He spent thousands of hours literally in basketball shoes, and he had to know which Air Jordans are the best. Now, if you're just looking for something for flash, bling, and style, then maybe get some Yeezys. I don't know. Wheaties must be a healthy cereal because so many successful athletes recommend it. Well, no. I can tell you that the vast majority of the successful, and so that was a qualifier, vast majority, right? Athletes, they do not, in fact, as the saying is supposed to be, that they eat Wheaties every day, right? So there's MJ. And, I'm pretty sure a basketball star like this would eat a lot more than just Wheaties, or need a lot more than, just some whole grain flakes to be up on their game. Same thing for Serena Williams, right? But that's what General Mills, the company, wants us to believe, that, oh yeah, Serena Williams and all these others became great because they ate their Wheaties, right? Like, okay, sure. All right. And let's see here. We're coming to the end. We only have 2 more here. The bandwagon or common practice. So you guys are no doubt familiar with this. And I say no doubt because this is part of the maturation process of, like peer pressure, for example. Everyone's doing it, right? So it's okay. So the majority is not always right, though. The bandwagon, right, is, everyone's jumping on this wagon where there's a party, so you should go party too. But we debunk it or discredit it by showing that, not every person is doing it, right? And just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean it's, ethical or right for you. So, for example, using hidden notes during a test isn't as bad as copying from another student's paper. Besides, everyone cheats in school. Well, cheating is a form of academic dishonesty, and that's the kind of thing that can not only get you failed from class, but get you expelled from a school, as is plagiarism. So, by the way, in this everyone cheats in school, that's an overstatement, right? Based on that everyone right there. My mother is on my back about not going to church because she is embarrassed that the church people are asking about me. So the church people, church folk, are asking, well, where's your son? Where's your daughter? And they're pressuring her. And she in turn is pressuring you on your back, right, about not going to church. Well, it might be good for you, mom, and these other people, but I got other things to do, or I don't believe, or whatever, right? It's just the majority isn't always right. Or here, try this Tide Pod. All the kids are rising to the challenge, right? Or the cinnamon challenge, or whatever crazy challenge is out there. Just because other people are doing it doesn't mean it's right for you. So avoid common practice bandwagon. And then the last and final, ad populum. Remember, ad in Latin means to, and then the root of the word, right? Think of population, populace means to the people. And this is one of these, like the pathos-driven argument, it's one of these that plays upon your emotions, right? Or, as I say here, it's a favorite of politicians who appeal to things like, family values, or, God, apple pie, flag waving, all of that, right? And we need to be very careful about these kinds of fallacies because they're insidious. Insidious, if you don't know that word, great college level word, means kind of slow and gradual, almost to the point of not being able to detect it, right? Slow and stealthily treacherous or deceitful, right? So if something is like secretly or stealthily treacherous, you don't see it coming or recognize it all the time, like the snake in the grass kind of Satan image, if you will, right? So here's something that Trump actually said 2 years into his, or a year and a half into his presidency, because 2016 he was elected, January 2017 he took office. He says, young patriots like Preston teach all of us about our civic duty as Americans. And this is a moment when I should just bring it up for you. You may have seen it. He's in the Oval Office, I believe. And this kid has been invited there because he's talking about the flag. Maybe get rid of this kid. Yeah, Preston Sharp to be honored at the State of the Union. It's the big speech that is given. So there he is at the State of the Union, right? Between or next to his wife, Melania Trump, the First Lady. Okay. And it's about, flags and flowers that honor veterans. That's the context, right? So he said, young patriots like Preston teach all of us about our civic duty as Americans. Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us why we salute our flag, why we put our hands on our hearts with a pledge of allegiance, and why we proudly stand for the national anthem. And this, of course, is politicized because it's right when Colin Kaepernick and others, begin to take a knee or sit during the NFL national anthem, right? So it's like basically saying, you too need to be like young Preston here, and if you're a real American, you'll, put your hand over your heart, you'll stand for the flag, right? But of course, it's obscuring the whole, kind of underlying idea of why Kaepernick and others are taking a knee or not standing about, racial injustice, which, is the topic for essay 1. Or here, God must exist because every culture has some sort of belief in a higher being, and billions of people cannot be wrong. Maybe, right? I mean, again, a majority is not always right, but it's playing on this notion that, well, you must believe because it's common. And if you're an outsider, we will ostracize you for not believing in either our God or believing in a God at all, right? But I'm pretty sure we still have, theoretically speaking, a separation of church and state in the United States, unlike other countries. Okay, folks. Oh, yeah. So here is, what the quiz will be like. Well, not in this form. It's a different form, multiple choice. But like, you'll be presented with all these different possible answers of fallacies we just went over. And what you're supposed to do is determine, okay, which kind of fallacy is being committed here, okay? Here's an example, okay? Everyone at this company takes home a few office supplies, so feel free if you want to, right? So it may sound like this is, everyone is therefore an overstatement, and that's close, but the actual one, right, is telling you to do something like, hey, everyone smokes cigarettes or everyone has premarital sex. It's the, jump on the bandwagon and, steal a bunch of office supplies fallacy. And, therefore other people are doing it, it's fine and is common practice. So there are 10 in your quiz, 10 fallacies, and you choose the right one of whichever one it is. You will be given, the multiple choice. And then there is a set of questions, 15 questions, based on this story right here. And the story is the only thing you can use to answer yes or no to these statements. I shouldn't say questions, I'm sorry, statements, okay? So like number one says, a man appeared after the owner had turned off the lights. And you can only answer true or false, right? You'll be presented with a true or false in the quiz in module 2. But you have to read the story closely. It says, a businessman had just turned off the lights in the store when a man appeared and demanded money. The owner opened a cash register. The contents of the cash register were scooped up and the man sped away. A member of the police force was notified. And then it says, a man appeared after the owner had turned off the lights. I don't know. You tell me what the story says and whether that's true or false. And the exercise here is to try to get you to, not, bring any external information to have what we call prejudgment or prejudice. Just the facts, ma'am, just what the story says. So, okay, folks, that was a long lecture on basic logic and logical fallacies. I hope that helps. And that is due in module 2 on Monday, February 7th. All right, folks, take care.